In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes. The order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
Hey, so this month we are doing, we have 6 mainstream episodes and 3 Patreon exclusive episodes. So on the mainstream, we're doing Kabbalah 1 and 2. We're doing the Skull and Bones part 4. I think it's going to be called the Cult of Skull and Bones. Spanish Inquisition or the Black Legend, Sexual Alchemy part 2. And then we're also doing an episode on the Stories of Roland. And we have 3 Patreon exclusive episodes. They're all about the Kabbalah. Kabbalah, the supernal triangle, Kabbalah, the moral triangle, and Kabbalah, the psychological triangle. So, but that's not all. Wait, there's more. I stumbled upon this great story about our chivalrous knight Roland fighting a giant. That I didn't fit it into the Stories of Roland episode. So this month we're going to do this extra kind of mini episode for the mailing list subscribers. Like, they'll get it. It's going to wind up being an exclusive video for Patreon supporters. It's called The Brave Knight Roland versus Ferragus the Giant. I had a lot of fun doing it. I'm really excited for it. So if you're interested in catching it in either of those ways, you could sign up for the mailing list or check it out on Patreon. For the cold open, we're going to start as Roland and Oliver were children on the first day they laid eyes on Emperor Charlemagne. The 2 boys were waiting by a roadside, and the great hero, the king, and his army was passing through. Bugles were being played, and church bells were ringing, and in the distance they could see the flags and banners approaching. And eventually the vanguard passed. And the thousands of knights then passed, and the archbishop carrying the cross had passed, and then finally Charlemagne had passed. And the book says, and Roland said, someday, Oliver, he said, we too shall be knights, and we shall ride with Charlemagne and his peers as proud as the proudest warriors we have seen today. Yes, said Oliver, and his face beaming with delight. And boldly we will fare over land and sea, fighting the pagan folk and doing worthy deeds for the honor of God, the king, and the ladies. The 2 boys knelt together by the roadside, and they vowed to be true to each other so long as life should last. The 2 shared together whatever fortune might betide, whether it should be good or ill, to meet all dangers together and undertake all great enterprises in company, to rejoice together in success and grieve together when sorrow should come, to devote their lives to the succor of the helpless and to the defense of the right, and if need be, to die for each other. And now, said Oliver as they rose to their feet, let us, like true knights, seal our vow of brotherhood by exchanging tokens. And with the word, he took from his girdle a little dagger with a long gleaming blade and a handle of ivory richly carved and inlaid with gold. And it was a gift from his grandfather, the Gerard of Viana. And it had once belonged to the pagan king of Morocco. It was the dearest of Oliver's possessions, and hence the fittest token to present to his brother in arms. As Roland took it from his hands, he gazed with pleased eyes upon its razor's edge, gleaming like lines of silver. Tears stood in his eyes, for he knew how highly its owner prized it. Then, from the folds of its ragged garment, he drew out the short, broken fragment of an old sword blade, dimmed with age and much rust, with dull with many notches. My token, he said. My token, said he, is but poor return for this beautiful keepsake you have given me, but it is very dear to me. And I know that it will also be dear to you. It is all that is left of my father's sword. When hemmed in by pagan foes, he sold his life dearly in fight and died for the honor of the king and the church. Oliver took the proffered token reverently, for he had already known its story, and he gazed a moment at the curious letters carved in its side and its hacked and battered edge, and he placed it carefully in his girdle. And the two boys, after many earnest words and many kind goodbyes, turned away, and each hastened towards his own home.
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
Come on, let's go. Yeah, yeah. Giddy up, boy, giddy up. Let's go. All right, everybody, welcome to the Abercast. I'm John Towers. I'll be your home slice for this evening. That cold open and the featured book, I guess, for this episode is called The Story of Roland by James Baldwin. It was published in 1908. So I thought it would be, I thought I would do something fun and special for the new year. I thought we could kind of change tempo since this is like a little extra week here at the end of December. So I thought we get started. I would just like to remind all of you to stay off the roads. You know, there are amateurs out there drinking and driving. And if the fucking amateurs don't get you, the cops out there will. So, and they're looking for us, dudes and ladies. They're looking for us, guys. So please stay safe. We're going to sort of add on to an episode we did a long time ago. We once did an episode on the Song of Roland, which, as you'll remember, is this epic French poem based on the Battle of Roncevaux Pass. And it featured Emperor Charlemagne's nephew, this brave and disastrously arrogant Knight Roland, and his best friend, knight named Oliver. So that's kind of why I don't want to blow the ending of anything, but if you would like to go back, or if you're familiar with the story or the Song of Roland, or if you'd like to go back and listen to that episode, the ending is it gets pretty crazy, especially with the way that this thing opens. So just to kind of put everything in context, the Song of Roland starts when Charlemagne and his army are in the Iberian Peninsula. They're in basically Spain. All right, never mind. I'm just going to get on with this. A quick summary of the story. This is the story of the Song of Roland. It might go like this. Charlemagne's army was raising hell in Iberia against the Muslims. And this is long before the Spanish Inquisition and long before Ferdinand and Isabella, which we just talked about a few weeks ago. And the Saracen king of Spain, Marsilis, surrenders to Charlemagne, and he agrees to convert and to become a vassal. Instead, the king and a traitor to the Emperor Charlemagne, who was also Roland's stepfather, it's this Count Knight named Ganelin, lays a trap for the Franks' fiercest warriors, Roland and his paladins. And as the trap is sprung, Roland refuses to call for help using his magic horn. Even his best friend Oliver begs him to, and all the French knights and their golden spurs and their magical swords fight back, and Roland and his friends massacre an army of Saracens. But eventually they all die. Oliver confronts Roland and blames him for the deaths because he was too proud to blow this magic horn that he had called Oliphant. And Oliver strikes Roland with his sword, sending Roland off. But before Roland dies, he breaks his magic horn by fucking smacking it across some fool's face. And he finally blows it. And when he does, he like busts his temples out, and he fucking like goes out bleeding like a stuck pig. And then he dies, and the Archangel Gabriel comes down and takes Roland's magic sword, Durendal, so it doesn't fall into the hands of the enemy. And Charlemagne turns around and destroys this Muslim army, taking the land. He converts Marcelli's wives to Christianity. If you know what I'm saying. They draw and quarter Roland's stepfather Ganelin for being conspirator, and hangs all who stand up to defend him. So tonight, we're going to look back at some of the other stories about Roland that lead up to this glorious ending. And so, you know, the Song of Roland starts while they're in Iberia. They're in Spain. They're pushing towards Saragossa, actually. So the stuff here in this episode, except for the last little bit, the stuff here for this episode is all leading up to that. And then there's like kind of like a middle piece. And then there's kind of like we circle around to the end after Charlemagne has come back from Spain. So just keep all that in mind. I know I make it more confusing than fucking like Lucasfilm and the fucking the EU and all this stuff, the expanded universe and all this stuff. But just if you just hang with me, we'll hem it all up. But now, squires and knights of the order, go ahead and grab your mason jar and pour the spirits and the elements in the correct order and in the correct amount, and fasten your hauberks and draw your swords, and let's sally forth to the land of the heathen and, well, you know, you get it. So a quick note, the historical context of these stories, before the Crusades were launched, Europeans were in, I say, a constant state. People will argue that at length of encroachment. You know, I always talk about the Battle of Tours, and I have never done an episode about it, which is hilarious. And it ties into this, not only about expansion, but it has to deal with, I think Charlemagne's great-great-grandfather was Charles the Hammer Martel, and he was the guy that turned back the Muslim invaders in France at the Battle of Tours. He defeated the expanding Muslim invasion, and these dudes made it to like the middle of France. So this is this pseudo-mythical time period of these stories. Here in this episode, there are a lot of the army fighting Muslims in Italy and fighting them in part of France. And eventually, as we know, the story will go to Spain. When Charlemagne's army is crossing the Pyrenees back into France is when the Battle of Roncevaux Pass is. So tonight, we're going to talk about this Story of Roland. It's actually, I think, the Stories of Roland, but the name of the book is The Story of Roland by James Baldwin, 1908. All right, so we left Roland and Oliver when they were little kids, and as time went on, As time went on, Roland found himself in the court of Charlemagne, and he's like hanging out in the castle and so forth, and probably fucking some courtesans and fucking learning how to sword fight and all this. And all sorts of weird stuff happens to him along the way. And Charlemagne and Roland, they wind up meeting like the Swan Knight, which we did an episode about the Swan Knight a lot of episodes back. I thought that was interesting to actually to mention. They all marched the whole army across the Alps, where Roland was a squire in the army, but Roland and this other dude, Ogier, he was another squire. They distinguished themselves in battle by like putting on armor and fucking like sharpening sticks, and they wound up stabbing a bunch of dudes with sticks. And Charlemagne, Ellery, the brave knight. So he thinks that these squires that are dressed up as knights are actually the knights. So he's recognizing these knights' costumes, and they're like flags or whatever. And Charlemagne goes, Ellery, thou brave knight. Charlemagne did not recognize the squire in disguise, and he says, I have blamed thee wrongfully, for I thought I saw thee flying disgracefully from the field, but I was wrong, and there thou shalt be rewarded for thy bravery. Augury said not a word, but giving spurs to his steed, he rode onwards in eager pursuit of the flying foe. Complete was the defeat of the Saracens. In great haste they feared the retreat to Rome, and they left the French the masters of the field. And Charlemagne blew his bugle and called around him his peers and his knights, whom the battle had spared. And the good Turpin laid aside his helmet and his sword, and putting his mitre on his head, and holding his crosier in his hand, and sang the solemn De Tunum Laudamus. And all the mighty host joined in praising God. While they were singing, Olager the Dane came humbly forward and laid the oriflamme all torn. I think it's some kind of flag, all torn and covered with dust at Charlemagne's feet. And with him came Roland and the other squires, walking awkwardly in their misfit armors. And they knelt reverently before the king, and Charlemagne spoke kindly to them, and again thanked Ogier for his bravery, again calling him Ellery. And the archbishop held his hand above them and blessed them. And young Roland, bursting with impatience, this is classic Roland, bursting with impatience, threw off his helmet and Ogier's, and the other squires laid aside their armor. And great was the astonishment of the king and his knights, that they learned that the day had been won, and their own lives and honor saved through the valor of mere squires. And the king folded Ogier in his arms and thanked heaven that he had not hanged him last Easter. And Duke Nemon had, with tears of joy in his eyes, embraced both the young men and called down the choicest blessings on their head for the honor which they had done him by that day's gallant deeds in the signal service which had rendered the cause of Christendom. Then, turning to Charlemagne, he asks, what is to hinder my lord from investing these young men with the honors of knighthood? They richly deserve it, answered the king. Let us make ready at once for the ceremony. Such valor must not long be unrewarded. Great. Great was the rejoicing now among the French. For all the knights knew Roland and Ogier, and they loved them. Only two, Ganelin and Mayence. We already know about Ganelin, that motherfucker. literally. And Charlot, the son of the king, and their hearts burning with jealousy and unreasoning hate, stood aside and would not join in the general gratulations. When everything was in readiness, the young men again knelt before the king. The good archbishop, after a solemn service, spoke briefly of duties of the knight and warned them of the difficulties and temptations in their way. Then, taking the sword which had been prepared for them, he blessed them and laid them upon the rude altar which had been hastily built for the occasion. With this had been done, the king stepped forward, sword in hand, and smiting each of them 3 times upon the shoulder, he said, "In the name of God and Saint Michael, I dub thee knight, be valiant, loyal, and true." And the peers who stood about arrayed them in knightly garb, which had been brought for them. And Duke Namon, who had been the guardian and most faithful friend of both Roland and Owager, laced their golden spurs upon their ankles. Turpin blessed their white armor and invested each in his coat of mail. Duke Richard of Normandy buckled on their breastplates, and Guy of Gaborne presented them the arm piece and their gauntlets, and came Charlemagne with their swords, which he had taken from the altar. Owager he gave the plain steel blade, bearing the inscription, "Wear me until you find a better." But to his nephew Roland, we're going to find out this guy's he has a sword. The Hound would be he would have went nuts. This guy's sword is named Short. But to his nephew Roland he gave a wondrous weapon with a jeweled hilt and a fire edge gleaming like the lightning's glare. And Roland, as he took it, read the words engraved with many fair device upon the blade, "I am Durendal, which Trojan Hector wore." We're going to learn a lot about this sword. The oath of chivalry was now taken, and the new made knights each swore that he would be faithful to God, the loyalty to the king, and that he would reverence all women, and that he would ever be mindful of the poor and the helpless, and he would never engage in an unrighteous war, and that he would never seek to exalt himself in the injury of others, and he would speak the truth and love mercy, and deal justly with all men. And Charlemagne blessed them and promised to love them as his sons, and they in turn vowed to love and honor him as their father in knighthood. And then, having donned their helmets, they mounted their steeds, which stood in readiness, and rode away full-made knights. Skip ahead a little bit. Great care was taken by Charlemagne to provide armor for his nephew, fitting for one who was destined to be a hero. From the far south, a helmet was brought, a wondrous casque, most wonderfully wrought. Men said that it was the handiwork of Vulcan, the lame blacksmith of the Golden Age, the age when gods still lived and mingled with mankind. It was made of steel, inlaid with gold and pearls, and bound around with brass. It was engraved inside and outside with strange mottos and battle scenes and legends of knightly valor. Above its crest waved an ostrich plume, and in front sat a golden eagle. Only 2 such helmets did Vulcan make, one for Trojan Hector, the godlike hero of that ancient day, and the other for the noblest knight of latter times. The war coat which Roland wore had been brought from the far north, and was such the men of France had never before seen. They said it had the work of Wayland, the master smith of the Teuton folk. So curious had it been wrought, and so rare was the temper of its steel, that no thrust of a lance nor stroke of a sword can harm him whom it encased. The metal of which it were made had been digged from the earth by Doug from the earth by the cunning dwarf folk who lived in the hill caves of the north. While yet the race of menfolk was young. All of a sudden, this has turned into a fucking Tolkien book. It has been smelted in the mountain furnaces of the giants. 12 months had Waylon worked day and night on his forge, beating it into shape and tempering it as he only knew how. And when he had finished it, he had given it to Beowulf, the Anglo-Saxon hero, the slayer of the monster Grendel, and of the fire-breathing dragon of the north. When or how it had been brought to France, I know not. But when Roland first donned it, it is said that men whispered amongst themselves and said, "What need has he of such rare armor? Better give it to someone whose body is not already proof against harm." For it was believed that Roland bore a charmed life, and that like Achilles of old and like Siegfried, no weapon could harm him, save a single small spot on his body. Some said midway between his shoulders, others said the bottoms of his feet. This is kind of a running motif for something we're going to talk about later. But the sword that Roland carried at his side was the noblest piece of all. The world had never seen a more wonderful blade than Durendal, not Siegfried's Balmung or King Arthur's Excalibur, nor Charlemagne's Joyous, nor Oliger's Short could be compared with it to beauty and true worth. It was the sword which Hector, the mighty prince of Troy, had wielded so valiantly against the battle with the Greeks. From Vulcan's forge it had come, where the lame smith god had tempered it in the flames of Tartarus. Neither wood, nor stone, nor any metal could turn its razor's edge, nor war coat, nor helmet of steel could withstand its stroke. But one of its bright blue sides were many mystic letters carved, words which the Trojans knew, but which had long been forgotten, and which none but soothsayers could now make out. Magalese the dwarf read them, quote, "Let honor be to him who most deserveth it," unquote. On the other side were the words which I have elsewhere quoted, quote, "I am Durendal, which Trojan Hector wore," unquote, written in Latin. It is said by some that once when Charlemagne was in the valley of Moravine, an angel gave this sword to him and told him to gird it on a young knight who had never known fear or reproach. Others say that after the death of Hector, the hands of the wrathful Achilles, this wondrous blade had been taken and kept by fair Penthelius, queen of Persia, and that from her it had been handed down age after age from one generation to another to be wielded by the worthiest of Persia's pagan princes. The worthiest of Persia's pagan princes. Persia's pagan princesses. Persia's pagan princes. And at last, hold on, I have to make a note of this. All right, tongue twister. From one generation, I already did that one. And at last, Charlemagne had wrested it from the unbelievers and kept to endow it to his loved nephew. Let it be as it may, we know that the king gave it to Roland, but he invested him with the knighthood, and that Roland proved himself well worthy of the gift. Next to the sword Durendal, the thing which Roland prized the most was an ivory horn, which we've already heard a little bit about, which he wore hung from his neck by a golden chain. And this horn had been made from the tooth of a seahorse, or what is more likely, the tusk of a unicorn. and it was set thick with pearls and priceless gems and inlaid with silver and gold. Old stories are not quite clear as to how or where Roland got this wondrous horn, but I have heard that it too was a gift of the king. Charlemagne had long prized it as a rare treasure, not only on the account of its great beauty, but of its workmanship, and also because of the wonderful music which was said to issue from it when blown by anyone who was strong enough to sound it. Yet nobody in Charlemagne's time had ever heard it. The stoutest knights who came to Paris or Aix were challenged to blow upon it, and the king promised to give the beautiful instrument to him who could first make the slightest sound come of it. And although some had split their lungs trying, no one have ever succeeded in making a single note. On an idle day in winter, the king by chance bethought of him challenging Roland to blow. Oh boy, what would Freud say about this? Dear nephew, he said, have you ever yet been beaten in tourney or in fight? Nor have you ever failed in anything in anything you have undertaken. I have here something that will test your strength. It is the horn of my grandfather, the great Charles the Hammer. In his day, when men were stronger and seemingly more valiant than now, the most wondrous sounds were made to come out of it. I have heard it said that these sounds had all the sweetness of angel songs coupled with the deafening din of the thunder's crash. And instead of some slanders once whispered that I had that it was the sound of this horn rather than his own valor, or that of his fighting men that won for Charles the Hammer that grand victory over the Saracens at Poitiers, which has made his name so famous that men have grown wondrous weak of lungs, and not of a knight in all France can blow the horn now. Roland took the ivory bugle in his hands and admired its rare beauty, and he put it to his mouth and blew. And a sound more wonderful than any man then living had ever heard come forth, and filled the hall of the great palace, and rolled through the gates into the streets over the country, and was carried from city to castle, and from castle to countryside, and through the forests, and over the mountains, until the whole land, leagues and leagues around, echoed and re-echoed with the wondrous vibrations. Never were folk more astonished than those who heard this sound. Men and women and children stood in utter amazement, holding their hands to their ears, afraid to listen and yet wishing to hear. Some thought that it was the heavens were falling, and that the end of the world had come. Others wondered what kind of thunder was this, which, with all its deafening clangor, was sweeter than music. The king was with hastily gestures begged Roland to stop blowing it, but after he had ceased, the sound continued for a long time to reverberate among the castle towers, and from hill to hill, and from earth to sky, with the distant rolling of the thunder after the summer storm has passed over our heads. The horn is yours, said the king, delighted and amazed. You have fairly won the horn of Charles the Hammer, and no one can ever gainsay your right to it. But I give it to you only on condition that you shall never blow it, save in battle and in time of the utmost need. All right, what do we got? Patreon this month. This month, we started out with 2 Kabbalah episodes. And on Patreon in December, we expand on them with 3 exclusive episodes: Kabbalah, the Supernal Triangle, Kabbalah, the Moral Triangle, and Kabbalah, the Psychological Triangle. We take a deeper dive into this ancient Jewish mysticism for only $5. You get a deeper understanding of the Kabbalah because it ties into a lot of the topics that we find ourselves immersed in right now. Sex magic and also tarot cards. But on the $3 tier, you'll be able to get all of this month's episodes commercial free right away. The whole month's worth of episodes is on there already. Kabbalah 1 and 2, Skull and Bones. I think it's going to be called Skull and Bones Part 4, or like Skull and Bones, The Cult. I don't know what it's going to be called. The Spanish Inquisition, The Black Legend, and Sexual Alchemy Part 2. And then we're going to do the Stories of Roland there towards the end. There's a total of 17 exclusive episodes, all within the last 3 months. That's been put up there. Brand new exclusive episodes. You can't find them anywhere else. And then there's a total of 10 hours of bonus audio up there as well. And the swag, bookmarks, tattoos, fake tattoos, mason jars, t-shirts, etc. Partial proceeds for all of this goes to Tomes for Troopers. So thank you. This month for Tomes for Troopers, we sent out another D&D book to a soldier in Afghanistan. This one is more nearer and dearer to my heart, but we sent out deities and demigods out to this guy. A portion of all ad revenue, donations, and Patreon support goes to helping send deployed U.S. servicemen and women books or other medias. The donation link is in the show notes. The Patreon link is in the show notes. And over the last 3 or 4 months, I'm proud to say that we've been able to ship out over $80 worth of books and media. So thank you guys for all the support. And if you're interested in helping, check out those donation links or that Patreon link. Thank you. So Roland and Charlemagne's army, I should say Charlemagne and Roland, Charlemagne and his army and Roland. Some more adventures, and one of these adventures pits Roland against a mysterious red-plumed knight in one-on-one combat, for which the honor of this warrior maiden Alda and the signal. Okay, so we're just going to cut to this. It's in the book. So he's fighting this red-plumed knight for this chick's honor. The signal for the onset was given, and the two knights put spurs to their steeds and dashed towards each other with the fury of tigers. At the speed of the wind, the lances of both are shivered and pieces against the opposing shield. But neither is moved from his place in the saddle. Quickly then they dismount and draw their swords. How Durendal flashed in the light of the moving sun. Now does the helmet which the good Jew Joachim made do good service for the red-plumed knight. All right, so this red-plumed knight, I guess, had a Jew blacksmith named the good Jew Joachim. The fair Alda is overcome with fear, and she hastens back to the castle. She goes to the chapel to pray and falls faintingly at the foot of the altar. Never before has there been so equal of a fight. For more than 2 hours, the two knights thrust and parry, ward and strike, but neither gains the better of the other. At last, however, the sword of the red-plumed knight is broken by a too lusty blow upon Roland's helmet. His shield, too, is split from top to bottom, and neither wherewith to fight, nor to defend himself, yet he has made up his mind to die rather than to be vanquished, and he stands ready to fight with his fists. Roland is pleased to see such pluck. This plucky misfit over here. And he scorns to take advantage of his foe's ill plight. Friend, he said courteously, full great is your pride, and I love you for it. But you have lost your sword and your shield, and while my good Durendal has neither notch nor blemish, nephew am I to the King of France and his champion. I am today, great shame would be upon me were I to slay an unarmed man where he is in my power. Choose you another sword. So it kind of sounds like he's going to let him go at first, and then he's like, bet, go grab another sword and we'll do it all over again. One to your liking, and a more trusty shield, and meet me again as my equal. Roland sat down upon the grass and rested himself while the red-plumed knight bade his squires to bring him another sword from the castle. 3 swords were sent over to him, that of Count Gerald of Rainier, the Genoese, the Halteclear, a blade which the Jew Joachim had made, and which in old times had been the sword of Casamont the Emperor. The knight chose Halteclear, of course. Does anyone see where this is going? Anyone that listened to the Song of Roland and knows what's going on. Roland rose from the grass, and his fierce fight began again. Never were weapons wielded with greater skill. Never was there a nobler combat. The sun rose high in the heavens, and noontime hour came, and still each knight stood firmly in his place, thrusting and parrying and striking and warding, and gaining no advantage over his foe. After a time, however, the patience of the red-plumed knight gave out, and he grew furious. He was anxious to bring the combat to an end, and he struck savagely at Roland. But the stroke was skillfully warded, and Halteclear snapped short off near the handle. At the same time, Durendal, coming down with the force of a thunderbolt, buried itself so deeply in the shield of the red-plumed knight that Roland could not withdraw it. Both knights were thus made weaponless, but neither were vanquished. Wrathfully they rushed together to seize each other and throw each other down. Moved by the same thought, each snatched at another's helmet and lifted it from his head. Some say that a bright cloud and an angel came down between them and bade them to cease their strife, but I know not whether this be true. For as they stood there, bare-headed, face-to-face, memories of their boyhoods came back to them, and both were struck dumb with astonishment for a moment. Roland saw before him his beloved brother-in-arms, Oliver, and Oliver, now no longer the red-plumed knight, recognized his old friend Roland. Then they rushed into each other's arms. "I yield me," cried Roland. "I yield me," cried Oliver. And soon Roland would be engaged to the warrior maiden Alda, who is Oliver's sister. Great was the wonder of Charlemagne and his peers when they saw their champions thus giving up the fight when victory seemed assured. Equally great was the astonishment of the Viennese and of Oliver's kinsmen. Knights and warriors from both sides of the river hastened to cross to the island. They were eager to know the meaning of the conduct seemingly so unknightly. Unknightly. But when they came nearer and saw the men who had fought each other so hard and long and valiantly, now standing hand to hand and pledging anew their faith as brothers in arms, everything was made clear. And with one voice all joined in declaring that both were equally deserving of the victory, and Owager the Dane stood up and said that although the question had been between Charlemagne and Gerald, It was still unsettled, yet Roland and Oliver had acquitted themselves in all things and became true knights. Roland, oh boy, this is a good one. Roland was once sent as a messenger to Oberto, the king of Ireland. So he boarded his ship and sailed across the Western Sea. And on the boat, some old oracle or some fucking harpooner starts running his mouth about this evil island where there was like this sea god or sea monster. The book goes, then the love of old Proteus was changed to hate, and he vowed that he would not rest nor slumber until he had avenged the slight that had thus been put upon him. And he sent great troops of sea calves to ravage the coast of Ubada, and after them he caused a huge shapeless monster called an orc to come and overrun the whole island. Never was there a greater distress and terror. The frightened people fled from their farms and villages and fought safety in walls and towns, and between famine and now ravages of sea monsters, it seemed the entire nation would be destroyed. Now it appears that there was in Ubada, some kind of an oracle in whose decision the people placed great trust, and the king prayed to the oracle that he might not know how to appease the anger of old Proteus, and in turn his fearful wrath away. And the oracle answered that this can only be done by offering a daily sacrifice to Proteus to be devoured by the monstrous orc. And the king asked, "What shall this sacrifice be?" He said, "The fairest maiden that can be found either in Umbada or in the neighboring isles." "And how long shall this fearful payment of tribute continue?" asked the king. And the oracle answered, "Until a hero shall come to Umbada's shores, brave enough and strong enough to slay the orc. Then and not until then will Proteus withdraw the curse which he has laid upon you and leave your people in peace." So that's the story of the old harpooner. So come back from the flashback to this boat, and it just cuts back to Roland going, "Where sayest thou this savage island of Umbada lies?" And the guy goes, "It's in the great western ocean. It lies many leagues west of the green Erin." And Roland says, "Turn then thy course, good sea captain. Steer straight for that island kingdom. If such barbarous custom still continues there, it shall not be much longer." I love it. And this is like Roland. This is, if you can name any one of these stories, I think that this is it. He's like, "Wait, I just heard some drunken old harpooner tell me about this sea monster killing these Irish chicks for a sacrifice. Hold my beer." Head that way. Hold my beer. And they came in sight of the wooded shores of Umbada. The captain pointed out the high rock where the fair victims were daily left as food for the ravenous orc. Skip ahead a little bit. Roland ordered the ship's boat to be lowered, and he placed the largest anchor and the strongest cable he could find. And he sat down in the boat, and alone and unarmed, save that he carried the trusty Durendal, he rowed forward the rock. He rowed towards the rock. It was about the hour of sunrise, the time when the monster, they said, was wont to come out for his daily meal, and the hero rowed close to the shore. He fancied that he heard faint moans and feeble cries of distress, and he looked around and saw a maiden chained to the rock with iron links, her feet wedded by the rising tide, and her face hidden beneath the long tresses of golden hair that fell about her neck and shoulders, and his heart melted with pity, and the sight nerved his arm for the strange contest which was near. He was about to speak to the maiden when a sudden sound was heard, a roaring like that of a strong wind amongst the forest trees, or the waves rolling madly into some ocean cave. He heard the loud shouts of his companions on shipboard. The breakers began to rise around his little boat, and the monster was at hand. Huge as a rock-built castle, dark and terrible as a thunderstorm, fearless as the waves themselves, fearless as the waves themselves. Quickly, Roland went to meet the beast, and he stood up in the boat with the anchor in his hand. Quietly he waited the onset, and the orc saw him and opened his jaws to swallow both him and the boat. The red eyes of the creature glared like baleful bonfires in the morning light. The huge tail lashed the waters into foam, and it was a fearful moment, but Roland faltered not. He raised the heavy anchor higher still, and then, with the strength of a knight well trained in the use of every weapon, he hurled it into the monster's wide open mouth, and there it remained, propping its huge jaws apart, so firmly fixed that the orc could by no means remove it. In nearly the same moment, Roland drew his sword, the mighty Durendal, and calling upon his strength, he struck the monster a blow which almost severed his head from his body. Then, guarding the rope to which the anchor was fastened, he seized the oars and rowed swiftly to the shore. He leaped upon the beach, and encouraged by the shouts and cheers of his friends on board of the ship, he dragged the now dead monster onto the land. And now he bethought of him the captive maiden chained to the rock and half fallen to a swoon, scarcely knowing that she had been saved from the terrible death that had threatened her. With a single stroke of Durendal, the hero severed the iron links, and then he took her gently by the hand and led her away from this dreadful rock and seated her in a pleasant sunny place high on the shore. The kind and cheerful words he sought to arouse her drooping spirits, for she seemed dazed and bewildered, as if waking from some dream and unable for a time to remember where she was. He asked her name and inquired how she, so unlike the dwellers of Ubada, had been cast to this barbarous shore and offered in sacrifice to this bloodthirsty orc. And she told her that her name was Olympia, and that in her own home beyond the seas she was a princess, loved and honored by the host of subjects. And as she related how one day she walked on the seashore and had been seized by pirates from Umbada, and the other fair captives had been brought to this savage shore. Emperor Charlemagne, soon made the decision to invade Spain and to take the fight to King Marsiles. After this, Roland did many noble deeds of arms for the honor of France and Christendom. I cannot stop to tell you now of his gallant feats at Rome, when that city was besieged by Laban and Lucifer, the kings of Babylon, nor of his famous passage at arms with the pagan Sir Ferembius, nor how he fought and slew the giant Ferragus. Stay tuned, because we're going to have some stuff to say about this. A monster 30 feet high and a terror to the Christian host, nor how he conquered Sir Otuel of Spain in a fair fight and forced him to submit to baptism. All these stories and many more you may read in the songs and poems of the old days of chivalry. While everywhere there were tyranny and wrongdoing, Roland, with his strong arm and his manly voice, sought to defend the right and uphold justice. The vows which he had taken upon entering knighthood were ever in his mind, and he deemed that his whole life could not be spent more worthily than in service of his country and his king and his fellow men. So right here is where I would plug the Song of Roland episode in if I could. I would go back and just plug the whole episode in right here, just like boom. So if you're planning on going, if this story interests you, you're planning on going back, check out the feature topic links and you'll be able to find the Song of Roland episode. So you can just plug it in right here and then come back to this one because I still have a little bit more things to say. Such is the story of Roland as gathered from the songs and poems of the Middle Ages. And when Charlemagne returned, okay, so this is, they go to Spain, Roncevaux, the Battle of Roncevaux Pass happens, and Charlemagne returned sad and worn with many cares to his own chosen home of Aix. The fair damsel met him at the threshold of his palace, and it was Oliver's sister and the betrothed wife of Roland. And she asks, "Where now is Roland the hero, the worthiest of the barons of France?" Scarcely could the king make an answer, so great was the sorrow which lay at his heart. "Sister, fair friend," said he gently, "the noble knight whom we both love so well can never more come to thee, nor will his strong arm ever again defend us." Faded then the color from the faithful maiden's cheeks. She cried not, nor uttered a sound. She tottered and fell to the stone pavement at Charlemagne's feet. God is kind. He takes the broke-hearted home, and the maidens in this palace raised her up tenderly and bore her to the quiet little chapel where they watched over her body and prayed for her soul. The break of day, and then many sad tears and bitter lamentations. They buried her close by the altar, and full of great honor did the king pay her. And, well, that's it. Well, that's almost it. As we were talking about the heroic deeds of Roland, I mentioned and skipped past the story of Roland fighting a giant. And I had to tell you, bros, I was super excited to find that story. And if you're interested in that, go ahead, and it's going to be a free exclusive story we're going to do a January newsletter. It's going to be the exclusive story in the January newsletter. I'm playing around. It might also show up in some other exclusive content in another fashion or whatever, but I'm excited to tell you the story, and it's pretty good. It's fairly decent length. So there, go ahead and sign into the mailing list. We're going to tell you more about that later. But as for right now, you know what fucking time it is. Your drink's gone, the story's been told, and now it's time. What time is it? It's time. Soda Jerk says it's time to fucking fight. All right, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate each and one of you guys. Please let me know what you think of the topic and what you think of the show. If you go to abercast.com, you can find the links to all my social media there, so let me know what you think. You can also find the featured topic link, so you can easily find other episodes linked to this one. And also, if you're interested in my comic books or graphic novels, you can find links there. You can pick up a shirt. there's plenty of stuff to keep you busy on the website. Patreon support, patreon.com/Abercast. There's some fun swag. There's 17 exclusive episodes done just over the last few months. Brand new exclusive episodes, 17 of them. And then there's also over 10 hours of other bonus material that you can't find anywhere else there as well. And a portion of all that stuff goes for Tomes for Troopers. Donate link is paypal.me/Stigmata Studios. Portion of that also goes to Tomes for Troopers. And the plan, you can sign up for the mailing list. To get the graphic stuff. So what happens is you sign in to the mailing list stuff, and then it'll send you a link to the secret part of the website where you can go and download special graphics that accompany the episode. So if I'm talking about the Kabbalah Tree of Life and the Supernal Triangle, you go there and get a better idea of what I'm talking about, because I actually crack open my notebook and scan it in for the newsletter people. And I'd like to also remind everybody and encourage everybody to rate and review on iTunes. And thank you guys very much.
Just 14 when I had my first sip, and my darling whiskey, she tightened up her grip.